This is a quick sort of guide to artists who are going to go to a pen show to look for pens to draw with. And I'm making this as succinct as I possibly can, but it's difficult. It's not going to be easy, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. The reason that art supply stores are as big as they are, and rows of brushes and rows of paper and rows of different kinds of paint, we all paint and draw differently, and I don't quite know how you draw, or you, but I'll try to do the best I can to guess how you might draw. And I think I'm a good person to do that for, because I've collected pens for many years. I've sold pens to other artists for nearly 40 years. And I also draw myself, and I draw sometimes in many, many different styles, as most of us do. But you go to a pen show, and you'll be the kid in the candy store. You'll want everything, and you think you want everything, but you really don't. You want a pen that you can count on to draw, to make a line that you want to make, and hopefully, if you're like me, you don't want to spend too much money on it. The problem is pens are quite hot now in the realm of collectibles, and modern pens are expensive to make, so they're going to be expensive. Vintage pens are highly sought after by many collectors and people like you and me who draw with them. So those prices are going to be high as well. Yes, you can go to a pen show and buy a pen for $10. That'll work perfectly well for some of the kinds of drawings you might do. But I think I'm going to raise the bar a little bit to try to talk about the pens that I know best, that have nibs that are particularly responsive and expressive. I wish I had do I have anything on my desk here? I do have a few modern pens that were sent to me by Goulet Pens to try out, and I can't find them, but you'll have to just take my word for it. Most modern pen companies, not all, but most, have 3 or 4 different kinds of nibs, and nearly all of them will be firm, and you can buy them in fine, extra fine, medium, or broad, maybe. And most of them will be firm. You apply pressure, they're not really going to change too much. The nice thing about vintage pens, the nibs are gold, and they will respond to your hand as you press down harder. It'll make a fatter line. So, there's a few other things that I can say about the difference between modern and vintage, but I'm not going to do it right now. There's one other thing I should say just about vintage pens. They're not really meant to take India ink. There are a couple of brands or a couple of models that did. You can find them at a show, certainly, but I wouldn't recommend them. There is platinum carbon ink, which is relatively waterproof, and it does work with fountain pens. So this ink I would recommend with fountain pens, but I also would recommend you probably try to clean them out after you use them. After you've decided you don't want to use this ink anymore, you want to take up watercolor and you want to leave your pen at home for a while, empty it out of its ink. You probably should do that with any ink and any pen if you decide you're not going to use it. Okay, so first of all, how you draw. If you draw, let me just find a pen here at random. Here's a pen at random. If you draw very deliberately and sort of slowly, any pen, even a modern pen, will probably keep up with your ink flow. If you sketch really fast like this and push around, you might find modern pens skip. And even old pens can skip. Sometimes the ink cannot keep up with you. But most of the pens that I have will keep up with the way I draw. And I think that I draw pretty fast sometimes. If you're a lefty, if you draw with your left hand and draw with a hook, oh dear, you're, so I suppose it depends on how you draw. I have a fellow artist who draws sort of almost backwards. See if I can explain how he draws. He holds the pen, he's a right-handed person, but he holds the pen like this and sort of draws uphill rather than downhill like this. He draws like this. And that's almost how I think a left-handed person might draw. Where they're pulling, if they draw with a hook. If they draw like this, if they're a pusher, not a hooker, they might have better luck using a pen than not. But again, it all depends on how you draw. But a lefty, if you are a lefty, I often recommend a Schaffer pen. And what Schaffer pens have is this, what they call the Waverly tip. It slightly bends up at the tip. It's like a little ski jump. And that allows the point of the pen to hit the paper better if you draw sort of this way. If you draw very forcefully, pressing down a lot, I might recommend a Schaffer for you as well. As Schaffer pens, not always, but Schaffer pens were they're often very firm, and you could, if you needed a coat hook in your house, you could take a hammer and pound this into the wall, and hang your coat on it. They're very sturdy, and they can take a lot of sort of abuse if you really press down really, really hard and use really bumpy paper. This is the pen I would recommend for you. And sometimes I draw that way, and sometimes I use a pen like this. I find generally the line not to be as expressive as I like. So anyway, how you draw in lefty is, we've covered that a little bit here. The other things I'm going to show you are going to be sort of condition and price. And so let's talk about condition and price and rarity and size. When you go to a pen show, of course your eye is it's like going to a car show or a used car lot. Your eye will go right over there to that Bugatti with the spoke wheels and the wood trim, and you'll see what the price is, and it'll be many hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet, all you need is that pickup truck over there with the rust. You don't care what it looks like in order to make a good drawing. And the nice thing about these pens are the quality that went into the fancy Bugatti went into the Bugatti pickup, or this pen with sterling overlay and a rather larger size. This pen was made by the company that made this pen, smaller, standard size pen, and this bit adds hundreds of dollars to the price. The fact that it's bigger and fatter adds hundreds of dollars to the price based on from a standard size. So my advice would be, even though this one is pretty, look at these. Look at plain black pens. That'll almost always reduce the price by lots. If you see these two black pens next to each other, you see one has its pattern that's chased, engraved pattern on the hard rubber is very crisp. This is very faded. It's here, but you can barely see it. So chances are this pen will be more than this pen. If this pen was missing its clip, if you see two little tiny holes next to each other, you knew it once had a clip, but it's missing. That often happens on pens that are 100 years old. It still will write perfectly fine without a clip. So if you're concerned about money, find a pen that has cosmetic issues and is smaller and is black rather than in color. Here's another example of condition. The gold plating is almost worn off on this one. This one is almost perfect. This is one of the pens, by the way, that can hold India ink. It doesn't have a nib on it. Does this one have a nib? Yes, this has a nib. So this one was made to hold India ink, which was, they were sold to artists. They were sold to document clerks, people that wrote, stenographers who wrote in indelible ink. They would buy these pens, and what it is essentially you fill it with India ink, and when you're not using it, you pull the nib down, so the nib is now submerged in its ink, and then you put the cap on, which corks it. So essentially, there's no way for the ink to dry out, and India ink has shellac in it, so if it does dry out, you're sort of screwed. So, and if you really love India ink, ask for a safety pen. That's what these are called. Anyway, condition. Things that look brand new that are 100 years old are going to cost more than something that looks 100 years old. Another thing that makes a pen cheaper is often if there's a name on it. This pen was owned by N. Starrett, whoever that was. That'll make the pen normally cheaper, unless it was owned by Franklin Delano Roosevelt or has an inscription that actually has some historic value. Most collectors prefer pens that don't have a name on it. They don't want pens that are personalized. Another way to personalize a pen is to do this. You chew on the end of it. And I know you chew on the end of it. Look, they both match. Both the top and the bottom have the same dentition. And yes, this makes the pen uglier. A collector wouldn't want this. A car collector doesn't want a car that has dents in it either, or a broken windshield, or a missing headlamp. They want them to be perfect. So a pen that is traumatized, we'll call it, either by age or by teeth or by having a name on it, they will generally be less money, but it will not affect how the pen writes. And if you really love that pen a lot, and you really, really love it a lot, you might actually decide to change your name so that your name is on it. I have seen some pens where the name has been like chopped off. They, with a sharp knife, they sort of whittle it down to remove the name of their ex-husband or their abusive father or whatever it is. Okay, so there's that. What else can I tell you? Okay, well, you saw me write with this pen just now. Let's see, is this a piece of paper I can use? The back of a... Better keep that for some reason. The pen I just showed you with the teeth marks. By the way, I have a collection of pens that have trauma. I've had thousands of pens come through my, quote, shop, through my collection. And many of them are pens that were traumatized somehow. And I decided, and usually these would come to me in big lots of pens when I'd buy a lot at an auction or something like that, buy a whole box of pens in a shoebox. Back when you were able to buy pens in a shoebox at a flea market. Now you can't. And I would just keep them in a drawer. Sometimes if the nib was nice, I'd put the nib in a different pen and sell the pen. But I have a whole pile of pens that have trauma to them, and I actually am I'm probably the only collector of pens that have trauma, because I find it charming. I find the fact that this person who bought this pen was later that day run over, or maybe on the way home from the pen store, they were run over by a streetcar and never used the pen. And I hate pens that have never been used. Whereas this pen, think of all of the things that this did in its life. And I think that adds a warmth and character to a pen. So let me see, what other things can I quickly tell you about? Let's just talk about a nib for a moment here. These are the kind of nibs I love drawing with and doing calligraphy with, but we'll just say I'm drawing. I like I'm dipping this so there's a big gob of ink on the front. This one I press down and the nib spreads so that you get really expressive lines when you're cross-hatching or doing a drawing of the figure and you want to sort of imply emphasis on a leg or a arm or something. Is that what a figure looks like? And it can be you can get a very, almost a hairline line when you don't press down. But when you do press down, you get this broad line. And so flexible nibs are what I like. Sometimes I like other pens that don't do that. This sometimes can be very distracting. I just like to make those calligraphic lines, so I'll do a drawing that has a lot of just nothing to it. Whereas if I use a pen like this, the Parker 51, it has a stiff line, doesn't flex at all, and when I use a pen like this to draw or to write with, I'm sort of very conscious of the contour of a thing. And I like that I can also, you can do this with any pen. You can sort of tip it upside down, and you almost always get a thinner line on the upside down side than you do on the front side. Of course, with a when it's upside down, you cannot apply pressure because that's not going to do any good. It might just make the tines go together and not put any ink out. But a Parker 51, it's one of the best pens ever made if you like the Johnny two-note kind of line. I love them. I used to hate them because they only did that. But sometimes when I'm drawing or writing words, I prefer a pen like this because it helps me focus on the word I'm using, not how pretty the word is. So let me talk about pens that maybe you can look for that will be at a pen show. They'll be plentiful and they will be probably cheaper, or you'll find an example that will be less costly. Okay, any pen with a gold nib sold by someone that knows it has a gold nib. Now, if someone could have a big box of stuff and they think they're all steel nib pens and there's a gold nib pen in there, you might be able to buy one for $20 or $10 even. Every once in a while, you might get lucky. If anyone has a gold nib on a pen, 14 karat gold, which allows for flexibility better, it also doesn't corrode. It has an iridium tip on the end of it, so it'll last for the rest of your life. It's already lasted through the owner's original life, and now it's in my hands, and I'll die, and if I gave this to a 10-year-old tomorrow, it'll last the rest of his life, unless he pounds it into the wall for a coat hook. I didn't forget where I'm going, but I did forget a little bit where I'm going here. So you'll probably have spend at least $50 for any pen that is functional, that has a new sack put in it, or the filling system works. You should ask about that. Most dealers will tell you whether they've been repaired or not. And you can prove it by having them fill the pen for you right then and there. But any pen that has a gold nib probably will be $50. And they can go up from there. Even a plain pen that has teeth marks and a name and a missing clip, if it has all these things that are wrong with it, but it has this magnificent nib in it, you might spend a couple $100 on it. If there are some pens that I have that I would ask that much money. There's pens that I've spent that much money on just for the nib. So let me just show you a couple of other things you should do or be aware of. Look under the hood of any pen you want to buy, or even a pen you don't know you want to buy, because back in the days before sort of standardization, before the late 30s, most of the pens I'm showing you here are from the teens, 20s, and 30s. Some are from the 40s. Each nib was unique. They were creating nibs that followed 10 or 15 different nib styles, because people had grown up, or the fountain pens followed the dip pen world, where, let me just see if I can, I don't have as many examples now. These are all where you just buy pen nibs like this, And I think these are all one kind because these are what I use to draw with, and I sold all of my other weird ones to a calligrapher that uses different kinds of nibs. But vintage pens came on the heels of the dip pen era, and dip pens were made, maybe 100 different kinds of nibs they made for different kinds of purposes. And some were very, very fine, some were broad, some were cut at an angle, some, they all were very different. So fountain pens continued making nibs by hand, finishing them by hand. And you'd go to a pen store and you'd tell the pen dealer, I want a pen for accounting. And he would put an accountant nib in your pen. Or he'd know where that accountant nib that's already in the pen was on his drawer, and he would sell it to you. Some pens were flexible, some were broad, etc. So a pen from the 20s and 30s, teens, 20s, 30s, and into the 40s you don't know what you're going to see until you uncap the pen. And what you see is sometimes deceptive because it might look like it's a fine nib, and you put it in the ink and you draw with it, and oh my God, it's much wider than I thought, much fatter than I thought. And so test out the pens that you like. This is a Waterman from the teens, 20s, and it's a fine, flexible nib. Absolutely beautiful. And if you went to all of the modern pen manufacturers at a pen show and asked for their extra fine nib and try them out, they will not be anywhere near the fineness of an extra fine nib from the olden days. Take my word for it. If you ask for a flexible nib, they won't be as flexible as the older ones. So they don't make them that way anymore. The people that made these pens are all dead. Yeah. And making a pen that'll do what making a nib that does what this nib does would be cost prohibitive, which is too bad. So look under the hood of any pen, and you'll and try it out. Some pens unscrew, some pens pull off. Don't unscrew a pen that pulls, and don't pull a pen that's supposed to unscrew, because you might break it. You might ask the owner to uncap it for you. 9 times out of 10, if you see a lever on a pen, it'll unscrew. So that's one hint. Not always. Here's a lever on a pen, and this pulls off. This is a Skyline pen. It is this really classic Zeppelin shape pen. They made them in plain colors. They made them in striped colors. These are expensive. These are probably going to be about the same price. Maybe this one might be a little bit more because of that gold top. These nibs on these pens are really robust. I probably sold more of these to artists than any other pen because they're so sturdy. I feel that I can drive this nib over any kind of paper without worry. Their nibs are really, I don't know, they're just very strong and sturdy. So Skyline pens are great. they don't always have flexible nibs. Some of them are very fine and firm. Some of them are broad and firm, but they're pretty darn cool. What is this nib? You often see pen people at a pen show do this, where they sort of test the flexibility on their finger. They press down on the tines. Well, they can sense the flexibility. This one does that. This one, you just saw, does a lot more. I mean, it starts out broader. No, it starts out about the same, but you can get more of a thick line out of this one. So each nib has its own degree of flexibility, its own personality. I'm a very good listener. I can hear the little nibs say to me, "Okay, Daddy, you're pushing me too much," and I'll stop pressing down. Usually, I would hand this pen to you, and if I see you at a pen show and I'm explaining to you how hard you can press down, I'll say, "Okay, this pen don't make a line thicker than this." And then I'll tell you to do something like this. Make a vertical line, start thin, apply pressure, keep applying pressure, and then stop to there. And I'll say, that's how hard you can press down. Don't press down any harder than that, because you'll break the nib. Yes, you can break a nib if you mistreat it. But if you listen to me, you'll be fine. Skylines are great. A great beginner pen. I don't want to say beginner in the sense of your talent in drawing is at a beginner level, but it's a good pen, vintage pen to start with, because they have great nibs. They're relatively common, so they're relatively inexpensive compared to some other pens. And if you can find one that's black, that has teeth marks all over it, a name, and missing its little band, you could probably get it for a song. Another pen that is still under the radar is the Waterman Stately Taper Right, which is what this is. This is Waterman's version of the Parker 51. And it's a sad, if you compare it to this one, and this one is your pinnacle, this is sad in every possible way, except because the patent, they couldn't completely cover the nib like they did with the 51. Their patent allowed for more nib to show, so consequently what you get is a pen that actually has can have a flexible nib. So even though I wish 51s wrote like this by magic somehow, but they don't, so I buy these. And they're great pens. And as you can see, there's some bits of scratches on the cap, and so this would be less desirable to a pen collector than one that's in better shape. So that's another way to perhaps get a pen for less money. I don't know why I'm assuming that you and you and you and you are artists that don't have money. Maybe you have lots of money and you can buy this pen instead of this one. Go for it. Go for it. But spending a lot of money on the way the pen looks, though, is not going to make it draw any better for you. This pen has an engraving on it, which I got this on eBay, and I think it has this beautiful nib, which I dropped sitting on a park bench drawing with a number of different pens, and I sat this down, and it rolled off somehow between the cracks of the bench, and the nib was exposed, and the nib hit the ground at 32 feet per second squared, and the nib was bent like that. And I brought it home, and I did what I could to pull it back to its former self, and it's a little scratchy, but I got it to the point where it makes me smile enough. Let's see. What is this? This is a little Schaffer. This will have a very stiff nib. Well, there's a little bit of flex to it. Most people would call this firm, but I'm able to coax a little bit of life out of that nib. Another pen that you can find relatively inexpensively are these Schaffers. No, where is it? This Schaffer. These were, I think, manufactured for students. They have the same quality that went into the pens that they would sell to the bank owner, but they were smaller, and these often have really, really sweet nibs in them. They often can be very, very fine. They're very smooth and very fine, and they do have a little bit of variety of line when you press down. So these nibs are just magnificent, and they're in a pen called the Schaffer 33 or the Craftsman or whatever. They had all sorts of weird names for these pens, but simple and plain and black. Other pens that are relatively inexpensive compared to their brothers are what are called ladies' pens. They have a little ring at the top rather than a clip, because these were meant to, women didn't have pockets back in the olden days, hang on your on a chain on your neck or on your blouse or something. You would find these. So these are relatively smaller, and they're relatively cheaper because of that. We're rather chauvinistic, I guess, in the pen world, where we like the man pens rather than the daintier pens for dames. Here's another lady's pen, Schaffer, another Schaffer. So did I hit all of the points on my list? Look at this nib. Very responsive. Here's a pen that might be less money because of that big dent in it. That's where you can make up a story. That's where Grandpa was in World War II, and part of the castle fell on him, and this saved his life because it hit his pen when the tower fell on top of him. Here's a Waterman from the 40s. Often pens, as we move toward the modern age, toward the 50s and 60s, pens had firmer nibs for the most part. Writing with the shaded lettering line work was considered old-fashioned, so those pens went out of style. So what I will do with you at Philadelphia is I'm going to hang out outside the show for an hour from noon to 1 o'clock. And I will have a selection of pens, some of the ones that I just showed you, where you can try them out. And I can look at how you draw, look at how you hold the pen, look at how fast you draw, and I can do my best to suggest a kind of nib that I think you would appreciate the most. And that's my public service announcement or duty. I love pens that are used rather than just looked at. And if I can help you find a pen that you love, that'll make me very happy. And so I'll hang out at the pen show in Philly this weekend from noon to 1 and let you try out. I'll bring a dozen pens that will sort of give a range of what you might find in the show. And hopefully it'll help you find the right pen. And hopefully, if you are worried about spending too much money, hopefully I'll be able to find you a pen that will be not too expensive. Now, if you have lots of money in your checkbook and you want to spend money on something like this, you'll find a bunch of these too. But you're going to be spending hundreds of dollars rather than tens of dollars, scores of dollars. No, scores. Again, you're going to spend for a gold nibbed pen that is functional. You'll probably spend $40 to $60. I can't imagine anyone selling them for less than that, because I'll buy them. No, I won't. But you can certainly find a really good one for your drawing for probably $60. But if you want to spend $600, be my guest. If I had $600 to spend at a pen show and I was an artist, I'd buy 10 $60 pens, each with different nibs. And that's the other thing, one pen may not do 100% of what you want it to do. So you might need to buy two. It's like having two watercolor brushes in your watercolor kit. You have two because you need to. You can't do a painting with just the one. So, but a single pen probably would do you very well in the drawings you do 90% of the time. So, ask questions if you want. I'll do the best I can to help you at the pen show. Bye-bye. See you Saturday and Sunday between noon and 1.